Today I'm interviewing Corydoctorow, who's an author, a science fiction writer as he describes himself, and an activist, really. And he came here for the CopyCamp conference that deals with the copyright law and the influence of the copyright law onto our daily life. So, Cory, I would like to start because you care a lot about privacy in many aspects of what you're saying. And do you think that the privacy is actually economically viable? Isn't it the case, maybe it is, that we don't have many privacy preserving systems because it's too costly to actually make them in the real world?
So that's an interesting and untested hypothesis. 3 months after Edward Snowden made his initial round of revelations, or after Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras and Bart Gellman released the revelations Snowden had given to them, the Pew Center for American Life, which does very rigorous statistical analysis of American internet use, surveyed a large, statistically significant random sample of Americans and found that 87% of them had taken some affirmative step to protect their privacy in the 3 months since Snowden. Now, nothing they did helped them protect their privacy, because there is no box on your Facebook privacy dash that will give you privacy. The reason there's 100 boxes on your Facebook privacy dash is the same reason that if you go to a casino and you go to the craps table, there's 100 lines and numbers on the table. It's so you can't figure out what's going on. Right? If you ever want to have a fun time, ask the croupier at a Vegas casino or at any casino to explain what the lines and numbers are on the craps table, and you'll quickly realize they're just a nonsense. They're there so you can't figure out whether you're making a good bet or a bad bet. Same with Facebook. But the interesting thing is, if 87% of Americans want a product that no one is selling them, then presumably there are people who will invest in those products. What's happened since Snowden and since the Pew study is that there has been a lot of investment capital and a lot of private foundation money and public-spirited effort in making crypto tools, privacy tools, accessible to everyone. And it's not clear how successful they'll be, but I'm reminded of the world before desktop publishing. So before desktop publishing, every tool that existed to let you set type assumed that you knew about type, assumed that you were already a typographer. They were very abstract and very difficult and highly technical. And when the desktop publishing revolution happened, we made tools that let you do about 97% of what a typesetter was doing without having to know much about type. Now, the remaining 3% is still important, right? There is a huge difference between something typeset by someone who knows what they're doing and someone who's just playing around with fonts in Word. But there is also a massive difference between typesetting before desktop publishing, where as a normal person your only option was maybe to draw the letters, and now, where we have a huge outpouring of things that are much nicer than what we were able to do before. And before Snowden, I think most people didn't value privacy because they didn't understand the privacy implications of their decisions. It wasn't that they didn't think privacy was important, they just didn't think they were giving much up in making disclosures to Facebook or accepting third-party cookies. They didn't understand what the consequences might be, how it might redound on them. And the people who did, by and large, were very technical. Because to understand how third-party cookies work, to understand how correlations are done in Facebook's enormous databases, you had to be really technical. And so all the interfaces for privacy tools started from the assumption that everyone who used them was a very technical person to begin with. And so now we're testing the hypothesis, right? Is it irreducibly technical? Or is it just that, like desktop publishing, no one ever tried, really, with the kind of extreme investment and effort that we now have to make these tools usable? And we'll see. I'm on the advisory board of a foundation called Simply Secure, which is a nonprofit that is doing very high-level usability development for existing open source and free software privacy tools like OTR, the chat protocol. And we're not only making these free and open front ends for them, but we're also documenting the usability process. And the people who are running it come out of some of the best usability labs in the world. and they're documenting how they're assessing and refining the usability of it to produce, in addition to the front end, also a toolkit for anyone who's building security tools to improve the usability of their security tools for normal people. So we'll see, right? We're running that experiment right now.
So since you've mentioned Snowden, do you think that whistleblowing in general is a beneficial process? Is it something that's beneficial to the society and to the further development of the rights of all the people?
Well, I think that the question as posed is a tautology, in that whistleblowing is by definition a socially beneficial leak, right? Whistleblowing is when you leak something to expose corruption, right? So I do think that leaking information to expose corruption is good. The real question is what kind of leaks qualify as whistleblowing, and which kind of leaks are just leaks. So, there are some liminal cases, right? If you discover that a company has bad security and you leak 100,000 credit card numbers and the accompanying personal information to prove that they have bad security, you probably do a service to society, and that company will probably tighten up their security. And if then they get sued by 100,000 customers, it's likely that all of their competitors will make some effort to improve their security, and if they don't, it's likely that their competitors' insurance adjusters will knock on their door and say, we're not insuring you for losses unless you tighten up your security. But is there a way that you could do that didn't bring this to bear? And I think there are. Like, you can show that you have 100,000 credit card numbers to a trustworthy journalist who can accept your tranche of credit card numbers and hold them in escrow, and then report that they exist, and then use redacted examples to show that the tranche exists without making all of those numbers public. And there are, in fact, people who've done just that. That's a good middle ground. One area where it's controversial is in the responsible disclosure world, where security researchers will discover that there's a flaw or a defect in some critical piece of software. And historically, when they've done that and gone to the companies and said, we've found this flaw, the company's position has been effectively, no one will ever exploit that. No one is as smart as you. We don't have to patch it. It was very nice of you to disclose it to us. Now run along. When we have a moment and there's nothing else to do, we'll have a look at it. And generally speaking, those defects have sat there, and in some cases, those defects have then been exploited by other parties who independently discovered them. And so we now have the responsible disclosure movement, which tries to strike a balance by going to firms and saying, we have found the flaw, and we have already written a paper about it for some journal or for some other source, and they are publishing it in 120 days. That's how long you have to get your patch out. And that, again, seems to be a good balance between simply releasing a zero-day flaw before it can be patched and trusting in companies to do it on their own, although it's still controversial. And so I tend to think that there are levers that will help this. I think, as I mentioned before, insurance companies are actually a vastly underappreciated lever for making this happen. I think that people who are worried about security should, in addition to going to firms to get them to tighten up their security, should go to their insurance companies. Because I think that a visit from your insurance adjuster telling you that you will have no insurance would be a thing that powerfully motivated companies to change their behavior more than just the threat of disclosure. I think you probably need both, but that we could put an extra screw to the firms by using their insurers to magnify the impact of a disclosure.
So we can agree, I think, that technology is important in keeping privacy and security, but is it enough? Can we actually guarantee technology safe to guarantee security safe to encryption, like in case of GPG, or do we actually need political action for the security and privacy to actually happen for many people?
So these are interrelated, right? As Lawrence Lessig says, there's 4 forces that regulate our society: law, code, norms, and markets. So you can think of the code dimension here as the what's possible part of it, right? If it is impossible to have secrets from the state, then as a technical matter, then you need much more legal regulation between the relationship of individuals and the state. If it is technically, the more it's technically possible for people to attain that secrecy from the state through self-help measures, the less legal regulation you need. And the more people expect that they should have secrecy from the state, should have secrets from the state, the easier it is to get that legal regulation in place. And the more technologically possible it is for people to have secrets from the state, the more they are able to expect that, right? I might expect that people who get hit by cars shouldn't be hurt, but it seems unlikely that that's going to become a norm in how we think about cars and humans, because we know as a technical matter we don't have any good solutions to being run over by a car without being hurt, right? So these are all related subjects, and once it is technically possible to protect yourself from the state and legally permissible to protect yourself from the state, then it is commercially plausible to make products to protect yourself from the state. And although markets don't solve all of our problems, if someone can get rich doing something, then people will probably try and do it. And so, and in fact, people will try really hard. So having a thing where you can get rich by doing it is also a very powerful way of influencing the regulation, the de facto regulation of our lives. So yeah, I do think we need legal dimensions in this, or regulatory dimensions. For one thing, we now have a really contradictory realm, because one of the things that we depend on for our security is the knowledge that the tools that we have behave as we believe they are, right? If a thing says that it's implementing GPG and not making any mistakes, we want to know that it's implementing GPG and not making any mistakes. But because of things like the law around technical protection measures, or DRM, where revealing a flaw in a system that would help you defeat the DRM is a felony, there are vulnerabilities in systems that we rely on for privacy and security beyond ensuring that we watch movies in a carefully constrained way, where those vulnerabilities are impermissible to disclose to the people whom they have the potential to harm, and as a result they live longer, they lurk there for a longer time. And so not only do we need regulation that makes it affirmatively legal to have secrecy from the state and from companies and from each other, but we also need the absence of regulation that impedes that process.
And you've been saying it quite a few times that DRM doesn't do what it's supposed to do, so what it's designed to do. So does it actually help the artists, or who does it help? What's the reason, do you think, for the existence of DRM?
So I think from the perspective, you can think of there being a kind of triangle here. There's the artists, there's the investors, publishers, studios, labels, and then there's the platforms, so Google, Apple, Adobe, who make the DRM, who make the TPMs. And I think that what the publishers get from adding DRM, what the investors get from adding DRM, is not protection from piracy, because as a technical matter, giving someone the keys to unlock a work and then hoping that they won't figure out where you put them when you gave them to them just doesn't work, right? People figure it out. But what it does do, because it's illegal to break DRM, is it stops competitors from entering the market and adding features that that users can get for a single purchase price. Like I buy a device and it lets me do more with my music, say, and instead you can sell it to them every time. So a really good example is music versus video. There's DRM on DVDs. Now everyone knows how to rip DVDs, right? Download a copy of Handbrake, you can rip DVDs like that. But because it's illegal to make a product that rips DVDs, or service, it's illegal to, you can't have a mailing address and a bank account and show people how to rip DVDs. What that means is that if you want to listen to your music on your tablet, you rip your CD and you get it for free. If you want to watch your DVDs on your tablet and you don't want to be a felon, you buy those movies again on iTunes or on Amazon. And so from the perspective of the publisher, what they get to do is transfer some of the value of the product that you've already purchased, the DVD, from you to them. So when you buy the CD, because there's no digital rights management, all of the value in it accrues to you because vendors come around and they make products to expand the usefulness of it. If you bought $1,000 worth of DVDs in 1996, now, 19 years later, you can do so much more with them than you could do back in 1996. You can rip them and mash them up, and you can stream them, and you can share them, and you can back them up, and you can, use them as alarm tones and ringtones. You can do a million things. Your kids can put them in their school videos, everything. But if you bought $1,000 worth of DVDs in 1996, all you can do with them now is watch them. It's the same thing you could do with them in 1996. That latent value has been transferred from you back to the publishers, back to the studios, who now get to sell it to you piecemeal. I call it the urinary tract infection business model, because normally that value, with the CD, it flows in a kind of healthy, easy stream, but with the DVD, with the DRM, it comes in like painful dribbles. Every feature costs you a little bit of money, and sometimes it never arrives. And so for the publisher's perspective, this is why DRM is a godsend, because they can transfer value that you would otherwise have purchased to them. But from the platform's perspective, it's even more valuable, because the law about DRM makes it illegal to unlock DRM without the DRM company's permission. And so if you sell a video that's locked to Amazon, or if you sell a book that's locked to Google, or if you sell a song that's locked to Apple, only Apple or Google or Amazon can unlock it. And so if you as the publisher and Google as the vendor, or Apple or Amazon as the vendor, have a dispute about what the fair share of the purchase price is, the platform has this really powerful negotiating tool, right? If your customers have bought $10 million worth of your products, Apple can say, well, you are welcome to withdraw your products from our store, but we're not going to let your customers follow you to Amazon, where you're now going to be selling the rest of your products. And so they're going to have to forever have two different sets of devices, two separate programs, two separate ecosystems to manage their libraries. Or if they're not willing to do that, then they're just going to stay here with us. They're our customers now, right? And so the bait for the publishers is the ability to control features. But the switch is that to get that ability, you have to sell your business out to the platforms. And it's a terrible deal, because all that featureitis stuff, you get that only in the short term. The long term is that your value all ends up in the pockets of these companies that end up being your competitors eventually. So Amazon now makes video programs, it publishes books, it has an audiobook division, Apple has similar kinds of studios in production, Google has similar kinds of studios in production. They're your competitors as a publisher, and you're selling them the keys to your business, right? It's an incredibly commercially naive thing to do.
So let's follow up with a slightly cheeky question, let's
Sure.
say. So if you could let go of some of your rights as a copyright holder, and as you're saying, it would probably make society better if we reformed those. But what if the cost is really slight? What if the copyright gives you as an author a lot for a very slight cost to society? Isn't it actually a good thing that it exists?
Sure, but I think we can talk about what that cost should be and who should bear it. So I don't think that the case right now is that the cost to society is slight, because in the name of protecting copyright, we've implemented mandatory surveillance and unaccountable censorship, where countries block whole websites, and you can't block a website without surveilling people's internet use to make sure they're not trying to visit that website. To stop people's clicks from going to the Pirate Bay, you have to trap all their clicks to separate the Pirate Bay ones from the non-Pirate Bay ones. So we put everybody under surveillance. And then we create these systems of unaccountable censorship, like notice and takedown, where we say that you can say that video infringes my copyright, and without showing evidence to a judge or paying any penalty if you're lying, you can make that video disappear from the internet, sometimes forever. right? So this is a very high cost for society to bear, not to mention the cost of digital rights management, where these disclosures about flaws and devices that we depend on are delayed and sometimes never emerge because people are worried that they'll become felons for aiding people in removing DRM. But one way to solve this is to just change who copyright applies to. So industry regulation makes sense, right? Big industries should have rules among them that define their terms of reference and how they're applied and interpreted. So the finance industry, for example, has a bunch of rules. They can be good rules or bad rules. Obviously, we've had some very bad finance rules in the past. But the idea of finance rules is not a bad idea. Standardized accounting practices and disclosure and all the rest of it, right? So how do we decide who the financial rules apply to? Right? Obviously, if you give your child, 10 zlotys for her pocket money this week, it's not a banking transaction, and you don't have to call the national bank and make a note of it, right? So we make a threshold, we make a kind of defining boundary between who is in the finance industry and who is not in the finance industry. And we might say, for example, a transaction of a million zlotys, that's finance. Anything below that is just business. And it doesn't have the same rules as finance. But if tomorrow there was hyperinflation and buying a beer for a friend cost 1 million zlotys, you wouldn't be a bank, even if you bought your friend a beer. We would reform not the finance rules, but the test for who the finance rules apply to. Well, with copyright, what we've done is we've said, okay, whatever the industry is doing, whatever the entertainment industry is doing, we're going to codify that in law, which is historically how copyright has been made. And then we're going to find out whether or not that law applies to you by testing whether you're in the industry. And our test has been, are you making or handling a copy of a work? Because making and handling copies of works implied industrial activity. You couldn't make a copy of a film without a film processing lab. You couldn't make a copy of a record without a record pressing plant. You couldn't make a copy of a book without a printing press. And so you were always industrial if you were making and handling copies. But we have hyperinflation in copies. Now, to read a book, you have to copy the book. Right? The way you read a book off the internet is you make a copy of it from somewhere to somewhere else. And that making a copy, we now say, triggers the industrial regulation, which is a nonsense. Because you are not part of the industry when you read a book. Just like you're not part of the finance industry when you buy a beer for a friend. And if you have to understand copyright to read a book, or lend a book, or share a book, or do any of the other normal cultural activities, then copyright will never be anything but nonsensical. Because there is no set of copyright rules that is, on the one hand, complicated and nuanced enough that Universal and Warner can use them as the framework for negotiating the license of Harry Potter from Warner to Universal to build the Universal Harry Potter theme park, but simple enough that a small girl in Łódź can use them to make a Harry Potter fan website. Right? Nothing fit for them will be fit for her, nor should it be. What we need to do is we need to say copyright's rules are constrained to the copyright industry, which isn't to say that people shouldn't have rules. There's rules about buying drinks for your friends. Some of them are normative, right? Like in England, you say you lived in Edinburgh, right? In the UK, when you get up from the table, you ask everybody if they want a drink, and you buy that round. If other people have bought you a round, you're not supposed to leave the pub until you've bought a round for everybody else. And maybe you get away with it once or twice, 3 times nobody invites you to the pub anymore, right? We have rules, and some of them are laws too, right? We have laws like maybe you pay the kid next door a few dollars to babysit while you run out to the grocery store, and that's fine. But like if you hire someone to clean your house every week, and you pay them cash under the table, you're breaking the law. Not the bank's laws, but a different set of laws that relate to money. And maybe we need rules or even laws about how we culturally interact with one another. But to say that they should be the same rules that the industry created for its own regulation is ridiculous on its face. And that's how you constrain the harms from copyright, right? Once you say only people in the industry are bound by copyright, then all of these bad things fall away.
I think the next one is pretty universal, so I think it also applies to copyright as well as privacy, because I think that a common problem is that people are not aware of the rights they can have. For instance, in privacy, people are not aware that they can have privacy and what are the implications of not having privacy. And we have those creeping systems, like in the UK, the essentially a censorship system for filtering the internet, which is opt-in. Opt-out, sorry. So how would you make people more aware of the rights they have or they could have?
So I think this comes back to our earlier question about how the four factors interrelate with one another. We do now have people asking for more privacy. You say that people weren't aware that they could have privacy. I think in many cases people thought they did have privacy, right? They believed that the atomic disclosures they were making, one fact here and one fact there, were not being joined up in a way that could come back to haunt them. But really, what Snowden showed them was that these could all be joined up in ways that were quite harmful to them. Not necessarily because they had anything to hide, although sometimes that's the case. Sometimes there's things about their life that they don't want widely known. And not necessarily because they had secrets. Maybe they just had things that were private. I know what you do in the toilet, but you don't do it in front of me. But also now increasingly because we're realizing that much of what we think of as algorithmic certainty is actually algorithmic good guesses. You know, it doesn't take much to see that big data is not ready for prime time. All you need to do is hang out on Facebook for an hour and realize how dumb the ads that are so highly targeted, right, that are targeted with the biggest, widest dossier on your behavior anyone has ever assembled, anyone could ever assemble, how poor that ad targeting is. And Facebook's given up on it effectively. You know what Facebook's business model is now? Why they just had a very profitable quarter that beat their expectations? It's because now what Facebook does is they encourage businesses to sign up followers. So if you go to a cafe now sometimes, like us on Facebook and get free Wi-Fi, and then they can turn a dial that when you update a certain number of your followers, 100%, 90%, 0%, will see your updates, and at the start, it's 100%. Every time you make an update, everybody sees them, all these people who know your business, and so it drives lots of business to you. And so that encourages you to sign up more followers, which they then send more business to you through, and that keeps going until you reach a kind of critical threshold, and then they turn it off. And then you get every post you make doesn't reach any of your followers. And then you get a call from Facebook's sales force, and they say, from now on it costs $5 per 1,000 followers to reach them. Right? This is the drug dealer business model. The first one is free, and then once you're hooked, it costs more and more money, right? Facebook itself has kind of given up on big data, right? So we have come to understand that the problem isn't necessarily that big data will find out what your secrets are, but that big data will mistakenly figure out what your secrets are, that it will get it wrong, right? Cardinal Richelieu famously said, if you give me 6 lines written in the hands of an honest man, I'll find them a reason to hang him, right? With enough dossier and the right algorithm, you can prove anything about anyone. You can say, well, these things are all correlated with being a jihadi or a bad credit risk or whatever else it is that can screw you in every conceivable way, right? And we are now increasingly alarmed about this possibility too. There's 1,000 pages of American no-fly list, right? There are not 1,000 pages of jihadis in America, but there's 1,000 pages of names of people who are not allowed to fly in America because of big data's mistakes. And so people are now becoming alive to this possibility too. And I think that we actually are in a good spot for privacy. We have not reached peak surveillance, but we have reached peak indifference to surveillance, right? There will never be a moment in the future where fewer people care about privacy. It only expands from here. And with that demand will come supply. Political supply, commercial supply, and technical supply.
Okay, so is there anything else you would like to be asked? Maybe some thought that kind of jumped into your head while here in Warsaw, or about the conference, really?
No, I mean, I suppose in the interests of feeding my family, I should mention that I have 2 new books out. One is called Information Doesn't Want to Be Free.
But yet you release those books also for free, right?
Yeah.
Like you can download it from your site. So how do you make money?
Well, what matters isn't that everybody who reads pays. What matters more is that everybody who's willing to pay knows the book exists and can read it. Every book, every movie, every song that you want to consume for free, you can have with the same number of clicks as you can to pay for them, right? And so really, whether or not you do a Creative Commons release, it's all voluntary payments, right? It's all people choosing to give you money instead of taking it for free or taking what you've given them for free. And there are lots of ways to incentivize people to pay. One is you can scare them, right? If we catch you taking this book for free, we're going to take away your house. That works a little, but statistically, piracy is a pretty safe activity, right? The likelihood of getting caught, very small. The other one is that you can try to convince them by performing an act of public generosity. And human beings, we like to reciprocate generosity. In fact, this is a thing that salespeople know, right? When you sit down for a sales conference, they'll give you a mug with the name of the company and a pen with the name of the company and so on. Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, had a ironclad policy that none of his commercial agents were allowed to take a cup of coffee, a cup of water, a ride, or a pen from anyone that they were doing business with on behalf of Walmart. Because he understood that every act of generosity creates a reciprocal feeling in the people who are out there. Now, I'm not doing it in a way that I think is manipulative. I'm extremely upfront about this. I hope that you'll give me money. But I also feel like, for me, I sleep better at night knowing that the people who gave me money because they felt that they should be generous to me because I was generous to them, and not because they were frightened of me. But I do want to mention the other title of the other book, because one is called Information Doesn't Want to Be Free, and the other one is called In Real Life, and it's a graphic novel that's right now number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. So I did want to get those plugs in.
So you do make money. Yes. Do you think that the hacker movement can escape the fringes of the economy? Because now the maker movement, or even the crowdsource economy, it's still on the very edge. And some people would say that it's just a way for the big players to shift the risk, because the risk is then on the people who do the research to actually get the funding and to actually make the money. So do you see hope for this movement and this way?
So I think that the neoliberal era, maybe the post-Soviet era, the post-Reagan era, has been dominated by a single ideology that you can call like the cult of fiduciary duty, which is profit above all else, which has produced this perverse outcome where fiddling your balance sheets, trading tax credits, gaming subprime financial engineering is actually more profitable than making any of the things that these rest on. And that has foreclosed on certain kinds of commercial opportunities because the supply of capital is limited to people whose businesses are impedance matched with investors whose expectation of return is grounded in that financialized world. But that isn't to say that we don't need all the things the real economy produces. And what I think is happening is it's like if you squeeze a toothpaste tube hard enough, even the smallest hole, the toothpaste will start to spurt out of. And we have squeezed the tube of the real economy so hard that we're starting to see the real economy burst out in places that are very improbable, crowdfunding, hacker spaces, and so on, that basically there is a strong need for all of these things that can't be hand-waved away through, talk about trickle-down economics and Laffer curves, that these technologies and these modes of operating have come in to fill. And of course the internet makes this kind of crowdfunding much more possible than ever, because the coordination cost of crowdfunding without the internet would be very, very high. Not to mention finding, having the global reach, being able to source crowdfunding from everybody in the world. If there's only one person per 100 square kilometers willing to fund your stupid idea, that's not plausible before the internet, but the internet makes it possible. So, the combination, these two factors, the growth of this coordinative networking technology and the decline of the real economy as a source of, or as the recipient of investment capital, have combined to make all of these things possible.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a great interview, and it was great having you here.
My pleasure. Thanks.